We split it into three pillars. So it was durable carbon removal, and decarbonization, emission reductions, and then nature restoration and protection, because like all of those are needed for global net zero, and we wanted the fund to support all of them. So we actually supported 68 projects since we started, and we've done 5 funding allocations. That's about $17 million. And it's grown to, I think, 28 donors or partners have been contributing to the fund. And many of them using an internal carbon fee, like Klarna, and kind of pricing their scope 1 and 2 emissions at $100 per ton and $10 in business travel and $10 for rest of scope 3 is kind of a typical carbon fee that many use. And that generates a budget that they then put into the fund.
Welcome back to This Week in Carbon. I'm your host, Eddie Smith, here with my co-host, Rene Velasquez. And today we're joined by someone who sits right at the center of carbon removal and corporate climate strategy, Robert Höglund. Robert manages the Milkywire Climate Transformation Fund, co-founded CDR.fyi, and serves on the EU experts group on carbon removals, and is also part of SBTi's expert working group on net zero. Robert, thank you so much for joining us today. Really appreciate it.
No, great to be here. Thanks for the invite.
Yeah. Would love to start out just for our audience, just to do a quick background on how you got into carbon markets and climate, and what ultimately drew you into the roles that you're currently in.
Great. Yeah, I worked in the NGO sector for a long time, like most of my career. So the last big job I had was I was the head of comms and policy team at Oxfam Sweden. It's a big international NGO. And I've been working on climate since about 2015, not full time for those first years, and more focused on like climate inequality, consumption-based emission, kind of national targets in Sweden and so on. But I got interested in carbon removal, partly because we were kind of looking at what to do about our flights. And kind of it's durable carbon removal. Is that something that's kind of believable? And but I couldn't really find the answer. So it became a discussion paper that I started writing in 2019, and it came out in 2020, Removing Carbon Now. And Oxfam published it as a discussion paper, and that was kind of my entry point into it. And then I started working as kind of in my own company, and very quickly met Milkywire and started working with them, and then co-founded CDR.fyi, and kind of on that way it is.
Awesome. Yeah, so with regards to your work at Milkywire, and in particular the Climate Transformation Fund, which is backed by companies like Spotify and Avanza and Metamedia, the fund has supported over 40 projects, right, I believe, and has allocated millions of dollars across durable CDR and emission reductions and nature restoration. So I would love to maybe talk about that a little bit and hear about, your work as fund manager, and how that, what trends you're seeing in 2025. Maybe tell us a bit about your portfolio that you have. There's a lot of different angles we can discuss here, but
no, for sure. No, thanks for the opportunity. But this is something that we started in 2021 together with Klarna, the fintech, as kind of the first donor and the anchor donor for the fund. And we set it up as a way to answer the question, like, what should a best-in-class company do for climate? So if you have a climate budget, how do you spend it in a way that helps reach global net zero as effectively as possible? And then really being kind of agnostic about exactly what we fund, but look at how can we maximize the long-term expected impact. So that means looking at things that are not certain to happen, but that may have a big impact if they do. We split it into three pillars. So it was durable carbon removal, decarbonization, emission reductions, and then nature restoration and protection, because like all of those are needed for global net zero, and we wanted the fund to support all of them. So we actually supported 68 projects since we started, and we've done 5 funding allocations. That's about $17 million. And it's grown to, I think, 28 donors or partners have been contributing to the fund. And many of them using an internal carbon fee, like Klarna, and kind of pricing their scope 1 and 2 emissions at $100 per ton, and $10 in business travel, and $10 for rest of scope 3 is kind of a typical carbon fee that many use. And that generates a budget that they then put into the fund. And like with the different pillars, we're a little bit different strategies. For durable carbon removal, we've been one of the biggest catalytic kind of buyers of CDR. That's 40 different CDR projects. Many of them, we were the first buyer, kind of taking a new solution like Kairos Carbon in the UK that are doing supercritical water oxidation, like a form of BECCS, but where they can use like very dirty biomass, like that's wet, and they can extract energy from it at the same time as they remove carbon. But like we're the first buyer, getting them some money to try the idea out. Of course, they're raising money and so on as well, but while helping them. And that on the CDR side, I think we had a lot of impact in broadening the ecosystem and getting kind of more shots on target. And then on the emission reduction side, it's a lot about like focusing on what's cheap things that should happen but don't. Like you still have blockers for renewable energy, for example, kind of funding one project in South Africa where the SHI, an organization, Clinton Health Access Initiative, working with kind of health authorities to get hospitals to have PPAs with renewable power, which reduces their emissions, but also their costs. But it's kind of regulatory hurdles and not a lot of maybe they're not used to doing that. So it's kind of a way of how you unblock a solution that should happen but don't. Or another example is like Human Rights Watch that with allies help to stop a license for a new coal power plant in Bosnia, and by lobbying and doing it in kind of together with allies. Also the type of work that we funded. And then on nature restoration and protection, a lot about like indigenous groups getting the right to their own land, getting able to patrol it, like things where you cost effectively can protect a lot of carbon in these trees. So that's kind of work that we've been doing so far, and I can talk a bit more about like trends and so on, but I just pause for a second.
Yeah, no, it's remarkable. I mean, 60 projects is a lot of projects.
Is
And
there an average or an ideal ticket size, Robert?
Yeah,
I'm
we're
listening
not like
intently,
some of these we are the sole funder, but most of them we're not the sole funder. Just to be clear, there are others that also support them.
But you're playing a catalytic role in an emerging market,
Yeah.
which is really critical.
Yes, so the ticket size would be coming up $200,000-$300,000 is what we've been seeing per project and year. So and then that's kind of the range where we have been. Some a little bit smaller, but yeah, 100 to 300 we could say $1,000. Some grants many grants to the NGOs, and then on the CDR side, it's been mainly pre-purchases, but also some grants there as well.
Is there an emerging do you think VC base outside of the hyperscalers that are obviously the large buyers, but is there an emerging VC base at that sort of next level? Let's call it sort of Series A that you're seeing emerging in the market for CDR projects? And
there has been quite a lot of VC capital coming into durable CDR, but I think according to our CDR.fyi data, it peaked in 2023. The kind of the amounts of money, and then it has been going down. So it's a pretty broad set of investors. We have some specialized funds that only invest in CDR, and then we have some investors that only do one CDR shot, like across their maybe climate focused portfolio. But I think it's going to get increasingly difficult to get VC capital for the durable CDR because the market is not really like materializing, at least not in. It's growing, but it's not what according to expectations, let's so say. So I think seriously,
but that runs counter narrative to the reality of what we need is this market to scale significantly.
Yeah.
Last week we had Henning Huenteller and Del Hardcastle from Bain, and we were talking about, you know, in in a net zero scenario, we need CDR, durable CDR, to scale at a 5,000% growth rate, which is obviously not happening on the ground. So what do you think is that decouple or that sort of that gap that's emerging in terms of the financing? Why
The
the
why, you mean?
financiers, yeah, why the financiers not stepping in to bridge that gap
Yeah.
in your mind?
So the reality is that carbon removal is cheaper than a lot of hard to abate emission reductions, but those industries won't pay for that until they are forced to. For example, the EU ETS emission trading system has a plan to phase out all allowances by like 2040 or 2039, but we'll see what happens. But when you get close to that, there will be quite a big demand from large emitters to buy carbon removal, but that's very far away. And it's also uncertain how things play out politically, of course.
Yeah.
And EU and UK are really the only jurisdictions that already have set the plans. Like everyone has it implicit. If they have a net zero targets, it's implicit that you would need to do this. But that demand is far away, and the near-term demand is from voluntary buyers that hasn't been, doing it in the kind of there's not enough buyers that do it voluntarily. So the market in the near and midterm is too small, and the long-term market is a little bit too uncertain and too far away, essentially.
Yeah, right. Okay, no, that's a very succinct sort of analysis. So thank you for that. I think maybe I could add. I mean, it's a fairly concentrated pool of buyers that are active on the voluntary side currently, with large mega cap tech companies dominating the ranks on CDR.fyi. Do you see that or the group of buyers broadening out?
It's slowly.
And do you have any sort of data points to support that? Maybe?
Yes. Yeah. We track that closely at CDR.fyi, and we see an inflow of new buyers like all the time. But it's, let's say, a few new buyers per month. It's not, so it's a bit of a trickle. It's constantly growing, the base of new buyers, and most of them do return to buy next year as well. So there is growth, but the high volume growth that we have been seeing the last few years is mostly Microsoft's purchasing. They have about 75% of all contracted volume, and they are like one of I think we'll say the only big company that's actually trying to reach a near-term net zero target, 2030. Like there's no other big company that's even trying for all their scopes. And they are doing what it takes, buying more than 30 million tons of durable CDR and even more nature-based forest CDR to reach that target. But we definitely need more companies to do it. And I hope one of the things I'm trying right now is to get more companies to, well, let's at least reach operational net zero then, like scope 1 and 2, and business travel, hopefully, and buy carbon removal for that, and make a claim that you reach net zero for scope 1 and 2 in business travel, or call it operational net zero by 2030 or maybe 2028 or something. Then that would cost near-term demand. I think what hasn't worked is to use the argument that like you need this by 2040, and unless you buy now, there won't be an ecosystem then. That doesn't work. CFOs won't listen to that. So you need that kind of near-term targets and near-term demand. So that's something I'm pushing for right now.
Is this this scope 3, scope 1 and 2 versus scope 3 dynamic has been something that we've seen evolve over the last year. And we're going to get into SBTi a little bit later, hopefully. But coming back to maybe looking back on 2025 and some of the trends that you've seen, or the dynamic shifts on the corporate side, what's been the biggest shift in the market in 2025 maybe that you've seen from prior years? Or like, are teams focusing more on, because maybe here in the US or in Asia, some sustainability teams are focusing a lot more on scope 3, and what you're saying is, you're pushing more for scope 1 and scope 2. But more broadly, yeah, I'm keen to hear some of your 2025 views.
Yeah. So something that I think is very clearly, it didn't start 2025. So it's not like just in this year,
Yeah.
but it's becoming more and more. That is that companies they want to do things they can account for. And I would say that moves demand away from things that are a bit fluffy and like imprecise, or that you really can't account for in your targets. And because of rules like the SBTi, carbon credits haven't really been able to account for in your value chain. And that's something we hear a lot, that we focus on the things that actually reduce our reported emissions. And that
It's about
some
incentives.
companies, yeah, it's about incentives. And some companies have a lot of opportunities to invest in their own value chain and across all scopes, but many do not really have much opportunities to use money to reduce their emissions. Like there's not that many things to invest in, especially not the more immaterial companies. So I think a way that I like to present it is that, well, you can do some things, but actually, if you have a net zero target across all scopes, most of that is conditional on broader societal change, right? Because it's deep down your supply chain. Your supplier need to have clean energy and have clean transport. So you're not in full control of that. And something that we encourage companies to do is like fund the world that your target assumes. So then that's one of the arguments also behind the Climate Transformation Fund, like that you need to do this kind of more broader funding as well of decarbonization, unlocking the things that don't happen but that should happen, and finance new types of innovation, because that's the thing that your target needs, and you're not going to be able to account for it in your actual scope 3 reporting, but you can report that we're funding and kind of funding the type of solutions that our target is dependent on. And then you could use your like scope 1 and 2 and buy carbon removal or carbon credits for that. But I think it's needed for some cover for that as well, like some reputational cover that is okay to make those kind of like operational net zero claims and so on. It's not enough with some people saying it. So hopefully we can get more of that. But I think if you just focus on what you can control, you also do miss a lot of important actionable climate initiatives that that needs funding and that not necessarily competes either with the type of things that you're doing.
Yeah. And I also wanted to get your thoughts on, the debate around what we've seen with removals versus avoidance, and then particularly like nature-based removals versus, durable tech engineered removals. You know, a lot of people are everything everywhere all at once type of people,
Yeah.
and then others tend to be, like we need tech CDR, that's the only chance, or like we need to do it now, we need to stop all oil and gas, and I was curious to hear your opinions on those kinds of debates.
Well, thank you. I think it makes a lot of sense when you talk about what you're running and why. So it's a big difference between when you're planning for your net zero state, and when you'll continue to use fossil fuels willingly because it's like most economically efficient, and you need to compensate for that. So if you take aviation, currently it looks like it's just going to be a lot cheaper to continue to burn fossil kerosene and offset that with carbon removal than it is to make electrofuels with hydrogen and capture the CO2. That may change in the future, but that's where the analysis looks like. But what you're doing then is like willfully continuing to use fossil fuels, and you need to counterbalance that with something. Then it should be durable carbon removal. I don't think it's enough to plant a tree and continue to burn oil, because there's always some risk that tree will go away in the future. But that's one type of use case, right? That's
You're
like,
also not. There's also, we're not talking about the boogeyman in the room, which is the radiative forcing impact of emitting at a high altitude, and the industry is not factoring that in terms of contrails and or RFI.
no, sure. I mean,
well.
that's if you want to compensate for that, yes, you could also use short-lived removals to compensate for that,
No,
because like that
there's a
effect
multiplier effect is where I'm getting at, right? So it's like it's ultimately 2.7 to 3 times more in terms of intensity. So your point is salient insofar as, the industries that are hard to abate, in particular, let's look at aviation because it's an industry very close to me. You're absolutely right. And the economics just don't stack up in terms of shifting away from the jet fuels that are fossil based. SAF is all we hear oftentimes, but the numbers just don't add up.
Yeah.
We're at less than 1% in terms of market penetration, and without clear policy signals that are universal, it's really difficult to stand up these projects. And then you've got competition for feedstock, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Exactly.
And as you said, it's just multiples of the current carbon offset pathways. And so I think that's the most pragmatic approach, which is what you've just advocated for. If you're going to burn fossil fuels, which they are, then there needs to be an incentive for them to purchase carbon credits that are durable and or whatever ICAO is defined, I think is sailing as well. But do that, and I don't think that that's happening at this point in time.
Yeah, and that's could be a really big demand signal. But currently, actually, most aviation, also shipping plans assume that everything will be SAF, and they don't really see a role for carbon removal, which I think needs to change. You need to see carbon removal as a valid form of mitigation in its own. It's not just something you do for unavoidable emissions. It's actual mitigation. But what I'm saying is that when you actually do it instead of emission reductions, because there is an option, SAF, you could do SAF, it's just very expensive. But when you do it instead of emission reductions, then it has to be durable carbon removal. That's my point. But if you're just trying to make as much climate impact as possible with your money, then you definitely don't just do durable carbon removal. Then you finance avoided deforestation, can be very cost effective, nature restoration, emission reduction projects. Like those can be extremely cost effective if you're just trying to maximize the impact of your dollars. So that's two very different use cases, and that also solves when you need durable carbon removal and when you don't.
Yeah. Very, very good. I like that. I subscribe to that thesis. Thank you.
Yeah, and speaking of kind of long-term incentives, right? The recent SBTi net zero draft. I read a thought piece that you had on the draft, and I want to talk about that. And basically, you highlighted that the draft is a step backward for durable carbon removal. On the one hand, it's great that it introduces responsibility for ongoing emissions, and it merges a carbon removal and beyond value chain mitigation framework into a coherent framework. And that's a great step forward for corporate climate responsibility. But on the other hand, you talked about a number of reasons why it's actually not a step forward for durable carbon removal. It's actually a step back, and I would love for you to maybe touch on that and dive into those reasons. And also, as someone that sits on the advisory working group for SBTi, I would love to hear your thoughts there.
Yeah, no, for sure. And of course, the working group and advisory groups are external, so I don't speak for the SBTi. It's just so it's compared to the previous draft of this new standard, CDR got worse, but the original draft didn't have much on CDR, only that you would need it at net zero, then you would need permanent carbon removal. But the draft was talking about requirements to start buying CDR, and now it's only going to be a requirement to do anything at all on kind of financing climate and not just CDR from 2035 and onwards. So that's very far away. It's effectively never, because everything will change by 2035. The SBTi probably won't even exist by then. So like whatever you say is going to happen 10 years in the future, I think is effectively never. So that's a bad thing. And I think it also, in the neutralization criteria, they used to say that you would need to neutralize remaining emissions with permanent carbon removal, and especially any fossil emissions. Now they kind of brought in a 41% kind of number that comes from IAMs, integrated assessment models, but they're mixing things with how IAMs work with what should be permitted if you continue to use fossil fuels. So that was also something that kind of weakened the case for these kind of like-for-like removals. But I'm also pretty sure that they will change that. They have multiple times said that fossil emissions should be counterbalanced with durable removal. So hopefully that they will get back to that. But they also they're trying to balance a lot of interests, because like the world needs a lot more nature-based removals. We need to max out on our forestation, and we need funding for that as well.
Not if there's no clear demand signal, because these interim targets are optional, effectively.
Yeah.
Right.
They're optional both for CDR and for other types of financing. Yeah. So it helps a little bit. I think the best part of the new draft, and I think this will stay, is that you have to report if you finance climate or not. So, and you have to motivate if you don't. So maybe that can help a little bit.
No green hushing or just kind of like, because that's something that we've seen a lot in 2025, I guess, kind of in the US, companies maybe being more quiet, but internally taking more action. You know, they're just kind of very low key about their new initiatives and investments. But you're saying, you know, now with this new draft, they have to report every time they do any type of carbon financing publicly.
And if they don't. So they have to motivate if they don't finance climate. That's the best part.
Oh, and if they don't. Oh, yeah.
So that can at least be a reason, like, look how bad it looks that we don't do anything for climate. Shouldn't we at least like meet the minimum requirement here? That could convince a few CEOs, maybe. I don't know.
It depends on the stakeholder pressures that they receive, right? So to Eddie's point, in the United States, we spoke to a corporate earlier today who was trying to find the polite word, but basically was just saying, look, there's no way we're sticking our head out here. We're not feeling any pressure whatsoever, and quite frankly, we're just not going to decarbonize. And I just thought, wow, so transparent. In his approach, but you can understand the rational economic actor taking that approach. It's just, I don't know how it reconciles to being a sustainability manager.
It is quite remarkable, like the differences, like, you know, when we talk to, you know, corporate sustainability folks in Europe and in Asia, and then when we have a conversation with someone from the US, it's like night and day. It's actually really remarkable. But coming back to the SBTi, like, you also called out the risk of delayed demand today means insufficient supply later, right? And that's very significant, and that the ecosystem simply won't exist when the world needs it the most, right? Unless companies step up earlier than the standard requires. I think you hit the nail on the head here, and I think that ties a little bit into the argument around, right, like locking in prices today before they rise, you know, or you have to buy for your shorts in 10 years, basically. But yeah, we'd love to maybe double click on that. And you know, how significant do you think that risk is for, let's say, climate finance as a whole, right? Like looking in 10 years into the future, like we're gonna just shooting ourselves in the foot at this point.
Yeah, definitely. Like most things take decades, right? It's to do in the physical world. Like carbon removal is intensely physical, right? It's steel in the ground. I was just at Stockholm Exergy yesterday, and they're building the biggest BECCS plants that's under construction, 800,000 tons per year. And you know, it's a big area, and it's a lot of material, and it's going to take like several years. And they started working on planning that, I think, 9 years ago, right? Like it's and that's 800,000 tons. And if you're going to meet like a few gigatons, then you need to build several of those facilities per week, right? To do that by 2050. And also, there's a lot of like R&D and know-how and people that would need to enter the industry. And you can't build everything at the same time, right? Like there's the financing and the people and the permits and so on. It just take many decades. That's you becoming like path dependent, and you're locking in how much supply you have at least 5 years from now with what you order now, and then building that kind of the industry. But it's both two things. It's like scaling things, and then it's also continuing to make sure that we learn and do R&D and unlock new solutions that may be even cheaper. So that's also needed. That's not going to happen through spot purchases or anything. Like that needs other type of financing, like
Really
grants
underwriting.
and yeah.
Mhm.
Mm.
Yeah. Yeah, and obviously, like offtakes go to or play a part in de-risking the finance of
Yeah,
those projects, right?
massively.
We speak to a lot of investors and financiers that are looking for those projects that have that credit-worthy uh,
Yeah,
offtake, and obviously that's a key role that Microsoft is playing in the market right now. But like to your point, financiers are not willing to deploy capital unless they get to de-risk and have bankable projects. And so, what other catalysts can we see beyond expanding the universe of companies like a Microsoft? Because
yeah,
it's a very short list.
yeah. I mean, what we're seeing with the 40 CDR suppliers that Milkywire have is that many are combining also like grant funding. Many get funding from the EU and other kind of philanthropies and with private equity. And then the purchase, we do pre-purchases, so they get cash, like also before they deliver the credits and kind of making it work with these things. But of course, they can't do like mega projects with that. That's kind
Yeah.
of more first of a kind. They're small demonstration and so on.
Well,
Um,
that's what you said. You're incubating the R&D side of the market, right? It's
yeah,
cutting edge.
yeah,
Hmm.
yeah. And you can build your first small project maybe with those kind of sources of capital. But then, yeah, then it's going to be the model of take project finance. We probably need some more things on the state side. Like the EU is now considering a buyer's club. They said that they're going to
Yeah.
do it for durable CDR. And I was in Brussels last week for a workshop on that. And I think that the EU could, carry risk there and like have credit guarantees and so on for anything that's in their club at least. So there you could solve financing and make sure that those can get access to a low cost of capital. That makes a huge difference, right? Like if you take the cost of capital otherwise would be like 15%, right? But if you have credit guarantees from like the state, then you could of course get like I don't know 5% or something, and that would be a massive difference in the cost as well.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
can we double click on that one, Robert? Can we talk about the EU's new 2040 climate deal and essentially what that means for carbon markets? Because you just referenced this 5%
Yeah, so
target.
90%, right. So there's a 90% reduction from 1990 to 2040, and now
Mhm.
5% of that can be met by international credits.
That's
With
5% of the 1990 target, right? So essentially
correct,
50% of the residual is my understanding
exactly.
of the maths.
Correct. So it sounds
Interesting.
little. It sounds little, but it's quite a lot.
It's quite a lot.
So it's more than 500,000,000 tons. I can't recall exactly how
Yeah,
much,
wow.
but yeah, that would be a lot of demand. We heard that the EU was referencing the Paris Agreement,
Mhm.
talking about Article 6.4, and also we have been
Is there a pathway
hearing
under 6.2 as well, or just 6.4? Do you think is a centralized approach?
that I think remains to be seen.
Remains to
So I
be seen.
mean, some countries like Sweden have done their own deals. Like Sweden did
Mhm.
bought credits from Ghana, for example.
Yeah.
On so and that will be Article 6.2, of course. So maybe it'll be a mix. I think there'll be a mixed types of products. I definitely think that there will be some carbon removal in there as well. By cost wise, it wouldn't become a huge part, but I think that the intention is to not just buy the cheapest, and maybe even set higher quality demands than the Paris Agreement or the CRCF and so on. So that would be interesting to see.
When we had Mark Lewis on, what was it, 6 months ago? He was talking about, at the time it was 3% of international credits would be met. Um, and he basically said it was peanuts. He said like it was like a couple million tons per member state per year for like, what was it, 4 years or 5 years. He was like, it's absolutely nothing. Um, so, and I just heard you said it was over 500,000,000 tons
Yeah, that's the
in
residual.
aggregate. So across the like EU member states, um, it could
Yeah,
be. I'm trying to do the math, but like maybe 40 million. What would you say per member state per year?
yeah,
Like,
good question. Uh,
Maybe we leave the maths for another time, Eddie. I think
Well,
there's
it was,
not enough
yeah, it's
clarity on
coming
this
back.
one.
It was coming back to the question about, you know, does this really, like, do you expect this to increase significantly corporate demand for high
Mhm.
quality
Well,
credits?
corporate demand will be something quite different, right? Like
Yeah.
it remains to be
Yeah,
seen
this is
if,
compliance.
yeah, it remains to be seen if country purchases also affect corporate demand, or if they somehow try to get corporates to buy these credits to meet. It could be that the state just use tax money, right, to buy the credits, like has been done in many of the deals, like the Sweden Ghana deal. That's the Swedish Energy Agency, like paying through the Swedish budget, and no corporates are involved, other than like transacting and so on, and being product developers. So yeah, the effect it has on corporate buyers is a different question. And I mean, ultimately, countries would want voluntary demand to help them reach their targets.
Hmm.
So I can see that they would like to involve corporates. Like you would still have a corresponding adjustment, and it would count towards the EU target. But I don't know if they assume that this should be funded through state budgets, or if they assume that there will be a bit of voluntary demand here as well.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, like the implications within the broader EU carbon markets, right? So we're talking the EU ETS, are going to be pretty significant with this European climate law
They
and
said
this.
that they wouldn't be in the ETS. So I mean, the ETS
Okay.
just covers, what is it, 40% or so, like of the emissions in the EU, and the most remaining emissions, according to plan, would be in the ESR, the things that are outside ETS 1 and ETS 2. That would,
Mhm.
like in agriculture, like distributed emissions, um, and there probably remain quite a lot in ETS 2 probably as well, because prices are not going to rise that high. So it won't go into the ETS 1, at least, that they are not planning for, where the industrial emitters are.
Okay, so then how does that sort of this new target then reaffirm the long-term investment signal, right? We started out talking about you need that stick, you need the policy guidance here, and that investment signal for the clean tech, the removals, and the high integrity carbon credits to align with this essentially this EU priority of climate neutrality, if I can use that word.
Yeah, no, there would definitely be a huge extra demand signal, right? From compared to where we are today.
So it
And
sits essentially on top of the already existing signals. Like you said, you've got coverage of sectors as per EU ETS 1 and 2, and then you've got these phases, and then you're saying everything outside of that now is essentially also going to have some sort of signal.
yeah, exactly. And then like who gets to do it, and how does it happen? You're going to need product developers too. I mean, it can't just be countries that do this completely by themselves.
No,
So
they're not operationally set up for that.
yeah,
So they definitely need to engage the private sector.
yeah, and starting it won't start immediately, right? Like it's from in the 2030s, but you still need to have, I think it's from 2031, and then
31 30 to 35 I think is a sort of a pilot, and then 36 to 40 is kind of the start of it, but they really need to see some traction, and we're not that far away, really. 2030 is just around the corner.
Yeah, so you need to start planning, because everything takes at least 5 years.
Yeah,
right.
Well, you just mentioned it, right? Like when you're saying you're putting steel into the ground, and you have to have the capex and opex budgets already defined, and you have to attract investors, et cetera, et cetera. Like it takes time to actually build out the infrastructure to develop that CDR market intra Europe. Obviously, Article 6 allows for a broader global context of a market to emerge, but we're 10 years in since signing the Paris Agreement, and we're only now, he says, at the implementation phase of that. And there's still tinkering and around the edges. The lack of clarity, the lack of demand and inclusion into various different systems, and some are emerging, so that there are positive lights. But that policy signal takes a while to get through. So it's a tricky one.
Yeah, no,
I
definitely.
totally subscribe to your thesis that without clarity and without clear signals, you end up getting this delay in the actual expansion of the potential supply, and then you just facilitate a huge short squeeze long term.
Yeah, yeah, no, definitely. I'm just looking at the numbers. So 5% out of the 90% would be 190 million tons per year in
Per
2040.
year.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so if it was 10%, it would be close to 500 million. But cumulatively, it's going to be, much larger than that, because that would be
Because you got
in
a 10-year
the
period. So you got
so that someone has probably already done scenarios on this, but possibly gigatons, right? And if you split that on EU 27, at least 7 million tons per member state. If you split it, like you won't split it across 27, of course. So some will be
and not equally. Some will be larger, right? There's large industrial
some
economies.
smaller.
Germany,
Yeah,
and some smaller.
And the quality standard for these credits will ultimately be, Article 6. But like, do you think the minimum quality standards for the market in aggregate will become, CCP or Article 6? Like that's it. Those are the bar for like buyers, and governments as well. Like they need to be, we've seen the coalition to grow carbon markets recently. Governments,
yeah,
Singapore, Kenya, the UK has kind of pushed for the ICVCM's core carbon principles to be that framework for quality. Um, and this is something that we didn't really touch on. And we see, what was it? Yeah, VCMI with the claims, the minimum, they have to use CCP. Um, Curious to hear your thoughts on the core carbon principles, and if you believe that really becomes the market standard for quality and for buyers. Certainly, we've seen an uptick in volumes being procured for CCP tag, where others that are not are being priced lower. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that would make sense. I think it's interesting because the durable carbon removal world, where I spend most of my time, is not so much of a big topic because I don't think that many products have that marking yet, and it's more like, is the methodologies like isometric and Puro, the methodologies and registries for durable carbon removal are like different ones than and then the forest and in the emission reduction space. So kind of its own universe. And here it would be more like if you already use the durable carbon removal space, like you trust the methodologies that isometric and Puro has, and that will be enough qualification for you. Like that it's just issued on these registries and doesn't have a history of like credits that were questioned and so on. But yes, I think that the core carbon principles is a good development, and uh, we'll see how that develops. I haven't followed how many projects have gotten it, like how much of the volume. You probably know that a lot better. But yeah, following that would interest me.
It's pretty broad coverage, and there that expansion of more programs or more standards being accredited in tier 1 or like level 1, and then the methodologies. It's a systematic expansion
Yeah.
of the existing sort of universe. But there are clear, obviously, methodologies that haven't made the cut, and that's the clear signal that the ICVCM is sending to the market around this transition towards higher integrity. But interestingly, what we're seeing, Robert, is an adoption by buy side across secondary markets, so traders, but obviously those servicing the corporates, that there's a gravitation towards CCP labeled credits. And it's interesting. It hasn't been an immediate adoption. It's been gradual, but we're seeing that resonate more and more these days. And the other thing that we're seeing is premiums as a result of the CCP label. And then the other thing is obviously this adoption of the market of rating agencies and their opinions and of various different projects across different programs. But if you have both CCP flag and a good solid rating, buyers are very, very willing, and that shows on the bid side, hence the inflation in terms of prices.
And now I see that isometric actually now has gotten CCP label for a number of their durable carbon removal methodology as well. So I'm just reading a press release here, and probably see more of that in the durable carbon removal space as well.
I'm curious to hear your thoughts on the ratings agencies and the ratings of these carbon credits. Exactly, we've heard a wide range of views from our guests this year. Some really like it, some really don't. Some thinks it creates a level of fragmentation. Are you saying this is 0.8 of a ton? If it's on the registry, it's 1 ton. What am I? If it's a C-rated credits, but it's on the registry, is it 1 ton or is it not 1 ton? I think it sparks that debate. What are your thoughts on the ratings from B0, Calyx, Silvera? It's kind of
Yeah. Well, of course, it is a questioning of the methodologies. Otherwise, it wouldn't exist. Ultimately, you would strive to have only methodologies and issuances that are rock solid. And like, if you're not rock solid, you don't get to issue credit. And then you don't really need rating agencies.
Can I challenge that? Because that was the paradigm shift that what we assumed in version 1 of this market. But it's an unfair test to have a rock solid methodology when the science continuously evolves. We don't have that. We don't have that expectation, and it's this kind of I think it's one of the flaws in our system, in our market, that it's how like this test of goodness essentially. We expect that technology continuously evolves over time, and we're okay with that, right? But and we're okay not using an old Commodore 64 or to do things now, and methodologies are the same. That the data points that they had, the systems that they had were state of the art at the time, and things move, and the projects tend to span a long period of time through their creative periods. So yeah, it's kind of hard to put the pressure on the standards. And look, I've a lot of people comment that I'm always really hard on some of the standards. But I got to stand up for them.
Yeah, no, sure. And I think there's a difference between different types of methods here, of course, as well. Some have
it's really
I mean, if you do geologically stored carbon underground, there's less that will happen, like in the future, that could change that, especially like as it mineralizes. It's a very low risk that influence can happen to it. And then that should be enough. Like you shouldn't need a rating, essentially. If the registry should do its work on making sure that there's no fraud going on, like, and so on. And that would be the main things to look for. But yeah, if for methodologies that may change in the future, and there's a lot of product-specific things, I could see more of a need for a rating. And also, if you want to do a large offtake and pre-purchase, maybe you want to look at things like financial risk. Will this, that, of course, the registry not going to help you with. So there, the rating will be helpful as well.
I think that's very astute. Yeah, exactly. We've seen that evolution over time, having worked with very large buyers of the sort of our careers, where there is firstly the sort of the level 1 risk, and then you could go all the way down, and that is really important. What you just mentioned, it's the financial stability and confidence in management to be able to execute on that, and it's not just a certification outcome risk or a timing risk.
Yeah,
it's the actual ability of that firm that is developing that project to be around for a long period of time. So it comes down to fiscal management responsibility and how well they can forecast and manage cash flows, etc. So,
yeah.
All right, well, we've touched on a number of topics throughout the conversation, and then coming into this closing segment, I wanted to ask, hear your forward-looking opinions and viewpoints, and maybe ask some good questions that could, have a little tongue twister, maybe. But with regards to predictions, I would say, what gives you optimism heading into the next year? And then also, what kind of keeps you up at night about this market?
Yeah, I mean, what's optimistic? A lot of things are going the right way in terms of cheaper energy and EVs and so on. And on the more specific, on the credit side, on the carbon removal side, that the EU is taking this seriously and want to do a buyers club and do integration in the ETS. And I think the integration of the international credits is also ultimately a positive thing, and that will increase demand. So like those are really positive signals. But then like especially on durable carbon removal, that we don't have more buyers and not enough clear incentives is going to, I think, become a very challenging years here. I think that 26, 27 for the durable carbon removal, it's really, we passed the hype curve, the top of the hype curve. Expectations are being adjusted and will be painful, I think, for a lot of people in this ecosystem. We just need to make sure that people survive and the good ideas survive, and that we can continue to building, and that it doesn't become like a lost years. So that's why we need to continue to, expanding the buyer base as well. That's how I'm viewing it right now.
If you could remove, if you had a magic wand and you could remove one barrier, whether that be like technical, financial, political, you know, which one would it be, to unlock the most momentum, you think?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and so I would like to have time to think about it, not to give an answer that I regret later. But yeah, if you're talking about durable CDR, that I focus most on, I think there's not so much of barriers that needs to be removed, but rather like incentives that needs to be added. So if you could add like the incentive, for example, the EU may have, like, let's say they have a label, you're net zero certified if you use carbon removal credits, the CRCF credits, then the EU will give you an official label on your product that you can use. Like that would be a new incentive for companies to buy durable carbon removal. And I think you need things like that. And currently has been going the wrong direction because like people have been so scared of greenwashing that they want to like root down on any claim. But
I
something
was
like
just
that, I
about to
think
ask that. Do you think that we see that pendulum swinging back to the center?
yes, but slowly, too slow. But yes.
Because I was just, obviously I lived in Europe for a number of years in Berlin, and there in the DACH countries in particular, there was a lot of certified products on the shelf, and consumer behavior seemed to adopt those products quite a lot. I remember even buying a carbon neutral chicken, and they called the guy whose company had provided the offsets to that, and I said, "Hey, thanks for the chicken." But then obviously, like you said, greenwashing concerns essentially just killed those claims.
Yeah.
Right. So do you think that now we start to go towards a centralized mechanism where, like you said, a government
I think to restore the trust.
certification outcomes?
Exactly. Yeah. To restore trust also with consumers, you probably need something like more official, right? Like an EU label, for example. That will really become, it's not just a voluntary label that someone came up with. It's like regulated through the EU. That could help, I think.
Yeah, it's interesting because there's parallels to that. Australia's had the National Carbon Offset Standard, and then they had the Climate Active system, and it's very well documented. A lot of the issues around that. Obviously, from a trademark perspective, you can have a certification mark, and then the government can regulate it. They can have really well thought out processes, but if they're not monitoring the companies that are on those registers, those trademarks actually get used on products, but they're not there's no penalties, no teeth on the non-compliance piece, and that gets quite dubious. So you need governments that are really proactive on that space in order to maintain that legitimacy. It's not just because
it's just it's not a panacea. We're kind of spitballing. You're like,
no, but I think you're absolutely right. I think that would be a really good incentive, right? To your point, to actually help to change behaviors. The recognition of CDR on a voluntary basis to count towards your net zero targets. Those are real incentives, right?
Yeah.
We spoke to some airlines recently who are saying, they want more incentives around the book and claim piece. They want to be able to claim the scope 1 and have engagement with buy side, like their passengers who are looking to purchase the Scope 3 attributes, and if they could have those recognized towards the Scope 1 towards their CORSIA, that would be interesting. So those are the things that market participants seem to ask. I think actually they oftentimes just get lost or forgotten, but they're actually the things that I do think can actually start to spin the flywheel a little bit more.
Yeah. And when you, from that framing, it is a barrier that needs to be removed, that you can't use it against your emission reporting. That's absolutely right. And that's definitely needed in both SBTi. Let's see how the ISO standard comes out. There may be more opportunities, but seeing especially carbon removal as like a valid form of mitigation, especially for things where you think you're going to use carbon removal in the long run, and aviation, as we discussed, like why can't you account for that right now as a way to reduce your emissions? That needs to be changed.
Makes sense. And with that said, I think that's a great way to close out the episode. Robert, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a wide-ranging and incredibly insightful conversation. And we talked about Milkywire's portfolio and your work there, and the signals coming from Europe and SBTi and the financing world. So massive thanks for joining us. And to our listeners, thanks for joining in. And be sure to check out the episode. Until next time.
Perfect.